Good morning, everyone. As you can see, I was very keen to start the panel, even before the titles. Welcome. It's great to see you this morning. I'm Nancy Kachingira from BBC News, and it's such a privilege to be moderating this panel today because digital transformation in Africa is not just about adopting technology. It's about improving systems and services for the continent with the world's youngest population, and that is an exciting prospect. So it's wonderful to have you here for this discussion. Just to set the scene, I'm going to invite one of our hosts. That's Melis Ekmen-Taboye, who is Managing Director for Policy, Strategy and Delivery at the EBRD.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Good morning, everyone. A very warm welcome. I was going to say a few words, but Nancy already made the introduction for me. Look, this is a topic which is very close to our hearts as we are expanding our horizons. And digital is extremely important for EBRD as it is enabling and deepening our strategic initiatives across sectors, across countries of operations. And as you have mentioned, digital economy has been growing 2.5 times faster than the global GDP and accounting almost 15.5% of the global economy. As such, it is extremely important. It's impacting the skills needed. It's impacting the employment patterns. And we are estimating that 65% of the children going to school today are going to be employed in jobs that do not currently exist. And that is reshaping our economies, businesses, social life, societies, and also how we are looking at our policy. While this is basically impacting every aspect of our lives, it is not optional. While it may take some time for technologies to develop, when it comes, its impact, its adaptation is going to be immediate. And Sub-Saharan Africa has been navigating this realm quite successfully with creativity and entrepreneurial spirit. There is a lot we can learn from them. Despite its well-known structural challenges, such as uneven access to electricity or broadband, among others, the progress in leadership has been strong, especially benefiting from its high mobile penetration, where SSA leads on mobile money usage globally. Young population, as you have alluded to, where 60% is under the age of 25, providing a large, young, and tech-savvy demographics. There are huge opportunities in agribusiness, healthcare, education, public infrastructure, and entrepreneurship, as well as policy and innovation synergies. EBRD stands ready to support and provide investments. But without further ado, over to our esteemed panelists of the industry leaders, and looking forward to hearing your views. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's staggering, isn't it, to think about that point that Melis mentioned. 65% of people in the future are going to be in jobs we don't really know what they look like yet. That's a little bit of what we'll be discussing with my panelists, who I'll introduce shortly. But just to flag that this discussion is going to be a little different. You can think of it in terms of a book that we're opening. So in the beginning, each panelist will add a chapter to this book based on their expertise and also looking at some case studies that we've picked out, because it's really important to have what we're saying today grounded in reality and what's actually happening. So that's what we'll be doing. And then after those individual interventions, we'll have a group discussion before we then add the epilogue, which hopefully will come from you in the audience. We'd love to hear your insights and your questions as well. And we've got Slido to help with that. So there will be a QR code on the screen. If you'd like to participate, join in the conversation. If you have a question or comment, just scan the QR code, and that will bring your question or comment right up to me, and I'll weave it into the discussion. So we really hope to hear a lot from you today. And I'll just introduce my panel, because these are 5 leaders who I think really their work bridges vision and implementation, which is really important. Joining us digitally, which is apt for this conversation, is Mustafa Cissé, Dr. Mustafa Cissé. He's founder of Africa's first graduate program for AI. He's also former director of Google's pioneering AI research team on the continent. His current work, however, is with Kera Health Platforms, and it really demonstrates how world-class technical expertise can address healthcare challenges with solutions that are built for the local context. So thank you, Doctor, for joining us. We also have Matthew Blakemore. I love the name of his company. It's AI Caramba. I always want to say Ay Caramba when I see that. And Matthew is advisor also to the UK's £100 million Bridge AI programme. His experience spans 15 years at the intersection of strategy and implementation, offering perspective on how AI solutions must evolve beyond just the templates we get from Silicon Valley and create meaningful impact in different environments. So welcome, Matthew. Also joining us is Folashade Femi Lawal. She's country manager for West Africa at MasterCard. She's got 25 years of financial innovation experience. And her work isn't just about payment technologies, because it's about building inclusive financial architectures which transform economies. Very important for our discussion today. Thank you for joining us, Folashade. And making up the group is Salma Setaru, CEO of Cashew Coast, which integrates 12,000 smallholder farmers into traceable supply chains through digital solutions. And she's got a focus on resilience and sustainability, which really does demonstrate how digital transformation for agriculture isn't just a technical challenge, but a really human and environmental imperative. So that's our panel today. And let's start by building our foundation. And I'll come to you for this, Matthew, because conversations about AI in Africa often leap to applications without necessarily spending adequate attention on the actual foundations that you need to build to make those possible. So let's start with those building blocks. What, in your mind, has to be in place for meaningful AI adoption to take place in various African contexts?
Of course. I mean, I think, first of all, I mean, it's already been touched on. The young population, tech-savvy population, is a brilliant foundational block that's required to ensure that Africa can upskill the right professionals and have long-term growth in this area. I mean, one of the big challenges at the moment, and Sam Altman has touched on this recently, is energy. And I think he said that countries that have the strongest energy infrastructure are going to succeed the most when it comes to AI, because obviously AI is quite energy intensive. And one of the challenges I think that Africa faces at the moment is over 70% of companies have regular blackouts when it comes to energy, which can impact the implementation of this sort of technology. And so it's how can we potentially use AI to actually improve the infrastructure around energy, because it can optimize, when you switch from green energy to nuclear energy or other forms of energy. And we've seen that work very well in Europe. So it's something that can be replicated in the African continent as well. And then also it's about ensuring that Africa has access to the funding necessary. So when you look at the global funding for artificial intelligence and growth in this area, I think EBRD are really helping to support Africa's growth in this area, but there needs to be a lot more work to support African businesses, because I think it's only $140 million compared to about billions of dollars that have been invested elsewhere. So there's certainly a lot of growth opportunities there. And then finally, when it comes to access to chips and AI chips and GPUs and things, Africa has been an exporter of raw materials to support other nations in developing these chips and other things. But it could be an opportunity for Africa to actually develop these chips internally, to grow their own infrastructure and businesses. And I think that's an area that really the continent can look at to expand their influence in this space.
I wonder, how significant are data centers? I saw somewhere that even though the population across Africa accounts for 17% of humanity, less than 1% of global data centers are actually in Africa.
I mean, data centers obviously have been a hot topic of late, because for AI to succeed, it needs high quality data and a lot of it. And so absolutely, I think there's an opportunity to, first of all, streamline the data across Sub-Saharan Africa. And I believe the EBRD's program of digital transformation is really trying to support those sort of initiatives. And also ensuring that companies in Sub-Saharan Africa are aware of the need to collect and utilize that data effectively. And that's really the key part of this.
I think it's really interesting how you said, even though there's an energy deficit, perhaps AI, which needs more energy, could actually help with that issue. And that's an interesting challenge, isn't it, when you need to do two things at the same time, build the infrastructure, but also build what's going to work on it. And we've got an interesting case study from Armenia, which has some of those parallels in terms of needing to do things simultaneously. So let's just take a look at that case study now. We'll just pause there as we've highlighted the challenge. And this is quite common, isn't it, across the African continent. You need better connectivity. The infrastructure is aging or non-existent.
Yeah.
Technology is energy intensive. What sort of solutions do you see possible in that context?
I mean, one of the things that we haven't touched on yet is internet access. And of course, that's imperative to access a lot of the AI models that are available today. And that's one of the areas as well where possibly these new satellite connectivity could really support Africa's infrastructure there. But when we're talking about the infrastructure, interestingly enough, it's less of an issue of potentially aging infrastructure and more of an issue of a blank slate in some areas, especially rural areas, in terms of providing that energy infrastructure that's necessary. And so when we're talking about AI specifically, I think we've already touched on the key aspects there where it can help to optimize the network. But interestingly enough as well, because it's quite a blank slate, it means that companies going to support those African nations can actually bring the latest technology. And in some ways, it's easier. And actually one of the things that I've seen when speaking to some territories that are going through similar situations is their determination to almost leapfrog some of these nations that have this older infrastructure in place because they can put in the latest stuff without it impacting older infrastructure and having to make it work with older technology.
In the way that many places went straight to mobile without the landline.
Yes.
Well, let's see what actually happened in this real-world situation from our case study. So Matthew, I think that's an example, isn't it, just of what's possible even within the context across the African continent, because we can see there how that $33 million intervention led to high-speed internet for 270,000 households and many other impacts.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that demonstrates that we're not talking billions to actually have a significant impact on the African continent, certainly. So, and I think sometimes the perception is you do have to invest way more money to actually have a significant impact. I mean, that case study demonstrates that Armenia really has transformed. And I know that a lot of the governments in Sub-Saharan Africa are looking to artificial intelligence as well to transform their territory and to really put them on the map for technology. And so with that sort of determination, backed by EBRD and other partners, I think it could be really transformative for Africa.
Thank you, Matthew. We've looked at that first pillar, which is infrastructure. Dr. Mustafa, I want to come to you now because infrastructure does provide the canvas, But then you really need the talent, don't you, that's going to provide that creative vision to use it effectively. I wonder, Mustafa, from your path, from Google to founding Kera Health, you've got a unique perspective to the talent question. How do you see the issue of developing AI skills at scale while ensuring that solutions aren't just transmitted or transferred, but authentically developed from the ground up so that they're valid in local contexts?
Thank you very much for the question. Going to the infrastructure question, I think it's important to go back to the root of this very point and think about it from first principles. What is the infrastructure? The infrastructure is what comes before we can build anything. And as far as AI is concerned, people are the infrastructure. Everything else comes after it. It's very important to pay attention to that. Everything you're seeing today, whether it's in North America or in Europe, it proceeds from decades of investment in the expertise, even before we can talk about the actual infrastructure that we refer to, talking about GPUs or data centers or compute facilities. Now, as far as Africa is concerned, we have it's both an advantage and a challenge if we don't have the right strategy and policy in place for it. Because fundamentally, technology cannot be detached from the environment in which it is conceived and created. That environment dictates what the challenges that are relevant to its people are and what's the best way to align the technology to be built with the way that population lives and the way that population uses the technology. And there is no better people to build such technology than those who live there and understand the problems. And those are Africans. It's an extremely young population. I'm dialing in from Senegal today, and in Senegal, the median age is 19, which basically means that when we talk about AI and we talk about its impact in 20 years, north of 50% of the people who will be impacted by what we're building today are probably not born yet. And it's important to put that in perspective. Now, this is also a huge advantage because that means we have a lot of available talent and potential expertise that we need to invest in terms of skills in order to get everybody ready for the ongoing revolution. And that means training. Now, irrespective of the amount of money that we will invest in what we traditionally call infrastructure, which is the compute facilities today, that will be useless if the people to operate those infrastructures are not available. And what will happen is that we'll just continue to import the technology and run it on those infrastructure and use it in ways that are not aligned with our own needs. So training is critical. It is paramount. And unfortunately, our governments are not investing enough in technology training programs. So this has to some extent to be done by the private sector. I've contributed to it in the past 5-6 years. In 2018, in fact, we created the continent's first graduate program in AI with a partnership with Google and Meta. And that program has since graduated several hundred students who went on to do amazing things across the globe, but most importantly in Africa. I'm sure that many of you have already used Google Maps. Well, if you did, you should know that you've used something that leverages some algorithms called semantic segmentation algorithms that create maps based on satellite images that were built in Africa by mostly Africans, and half of the team actually that built it. It is composed of young Africans who were also trained in Africa. So that is possible. It is 100% possible. We have examples of it. And we just need to invest more, whether it's governments, partners, private entities, in training. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have the right skills and expertise, irrespective of the investment we make in the compute irrespective of how we shape the policies, we won't be able to achieve the level of success that will meaningfully impact people's life.
That's a powerful point, Dr. Mustafa, especially around the first pillar of infrastructure actually being the people. And following on from that, the fact that the technology has to reflect and represent the people. And related to that, there is, of course, the question of linguistic and cultural diversity and appropriateness. We've got a case study from the Kyrgyz Republic that we can look at now. So these are challenges faced in this case study from the Kyrgyz Republic that I think will be familiar to you, Dr. Mustafa. Most AI learns from English. There's a risk of bias in AI models, and some cultures are being excluded from the digital wave. Is that something that you found in your work?
Well, unfortunately, this is going to continue to happen as long as the technology is predominantly built in certain places and exported in others. There is no other way. Make no mistake about it. If we decide to build a technology somewhere and align it to the values and the way people live in different places across the globe, then it is it, it will necessarily reflect the worldviews of the environment in which it was conceived. This is absolutely normal. And again, this brings us to the previous point, which is what are the ingredients that are necessary to build locally the right technology to serve the people who live in that place, whether it is in Europe or in Eastern Europe or in Asia or in Africa. And one thing that's important to understand is that, I mean, EBRD is a bank. Let me give an example that will be close to that. So a decade ago, the number of financially included people across the continent was actually very low. Why? Because that task was left to the banks. So the traditional banking model was not interested and was not even designed to include the vast majority of the population across Africa because the structure of the economy is very different. The nature of the enterprises here, the small medium enterprise or the lifeblood of the economy, the informal workers, as we call them, banks are not interested in those people. We had to wait until we had a completely new model based on what we call today mobile money companies, which started mostly with telco companies across the globe, to have all of this population of adults across the continent be financially included, right? So today in Senegal, 90% of the adult population has a mobile money account. Banks would have never realized this. And the reason is very simple. They are built for a population that is very different from the population that they were trying to serve here. They remain relevant in the ecosystem. They are specialized in certain things, but the vast majority of transactions happen on mobile money. This will be true for every technology that you bring on the continent. If it is not built for the people, it will remain niche, and unfortunately, the opportunity to solve significant challenges will be lost. And I think we don't talk about that enough. Mm-hmm. It's important to look into the challenges that we have today when we try to apply the technology, but it's also equally important to look at the challenge, the opportunities that we're missing because of the misfit that exists between the technology and the environment in which we're trying to apply it. And just to come back to your point regarding languages, if you're building a model for, let's say, Europe or North America, you have a huge body of knowledge that is available in written form across the internet. In Africa, the main social media is not, you won't find it on the internet. The main social media is the radio. And that's how we communicate mostly. This means a different modality. It's not written text. It is audio. It is spoken knowledge, and building the kind of model that could leverage that data has different requirements than building the traditional language models that are based on text. It means something completely different from a tokenization perspective. The models are different. The compute capacity that is required is different. It is more costly to label that kind of data, and therefore it requires a completely different paradigm. Even though that kind of data is also...
Dr. Mustafa, if I may, I just want to arrest you on that point, because it's a perfect segue, actually, to look at the outcomes of our case study. What you're saying is so important there, that social media in a Western context, it looks very different to what it is in the African context in many parts, where you're saying it's actually radio, and which, of course, is similar to this challenge that was faced in the Kyrgyz Republic. So let's just take a look at what solutions and outcomes were able to come from an intervention there. So that's a really good example about making the global local and contextualizing that particular use of technology. And I will come back to you a bit later, Dr. Mustafa, because I think there's many points we need to talk about in terms of sharing some success stories. We'd like to hear that from you a bit later. But right now, I'll make a quick transition to Salma and Folashade. I think there's a lot of overlap between the work the two of you do. So let's talk about that in tandem, because foundations and talent are important, but impact ultimately has to come from practical implementation, and that's something that you're both involved in. Salma, your work with Cashew Coast, I think, offers a very compelling example of agricultural digitalization. I'd like you just to talk to us about how digital traceability systems are actually transforming agricultural value chains, and where do you see data collection in rural settings really making a difference?
Thank you, Nancy. Good morning, everyone. Yes, I'll humbly attempt to explain how we navigate between digital innovation and the rural complexities of our daily tasks, and also talk about how AI could be an exciting opportunity to give us a competitive advantage as an African SME. So coming back to traceability, maybe just a few words at least on what is traceability. Traceability is about knowing every step in your supply chain, and it's about when you see everything, you hold actors accountable, and then you collect data to make decisions. And when disruption occurs, and trust me, disruptions occur all the time, you're able to make decisions based on evidence and not guesses. That's what traceability is about, and it's at the core of how we do business, how we integrate the supply chain in the cashew space. Now, I'll give you a live example. Last year, we raised money from a private equity investor in London, and one of the questions that came about during due diligence was, how exposed are you to deforestation? So thanks to the data we had gathered and analyzed through our SAP rural sourcing management, within a matter of half an afternoon, we managed to prove to them that only 2% of our supply chain was actually exposed to deforestation. I would also like to talk about, we always talk about farm-to-fork traceability, but it's also important to talk about fork-to-farm traceability, which is actually the money flow. And I think Mustafa talked about digital money, and I'll share with you a real-life example of how we do it. So some of you may know that actually all of the cashew that actually traded in Cote d'Ivoire or in Africa, for that matter, is done by way of cash, so hard cash. I'm just out of the harvest right now, so harvest just finished, and I've dispersed 12 million euros in cash in the bush. Absolute nightmare. So my battle, starting this business from 5 years ago, was to actually get our farmers to accept digital money, right? Because we see the images from East Africa, M-Pesa, Maasai farmers basically buying their groceries with digital money, and we get all excited. But my reality is quite different. Our Ivorian farmers are actually very reticent to accept digital money because they can't believe how a little tiny Nokia phone would hold all their cash, which is actually their only cash crop for the year. So what we did was two things. So work on adoption and worked on the connectivity issues. And remember, we're a tiny, small SME, right? And in the long run, we're all dead. So our reality is about resolving issues now. So what we did is the first thing we did is we were very astute because we have a program of school loans for our farmers. So we disburse typically school loans to our farmers for them to be able to send their kids to school around September time. So what we decided to do was to say, okay, from now on, all the loans we disperse will be digital. Because in that instance, they are asking for money. So it's easy to convince them to accept. And as they started accepting the school loans by way of digital money, they started experiencing it, right? And they started trusting it. And on the other hand, there is connectivity, right? And so my team today actually knows under which mango tree there is Orange or MTN reception in the 215 villages we work with. So, you know, it's about being obsessive about it, right? It's bridging the gap between digital innovation and rural complexity is actually being obsessive about how to bridge it. And I think it's too easy to just give up, and it's about having that grit to keep going. That's my 2 cents on,
I think that's such a good point, because we often talk about, you know, just build it and they will come, but what if they don't? And that's, I think, really talking about the sharp end of the stick there, the implementation and all the thought that needs to go into that as well. So thank you for making that point. And for Lashade, if we stay on the same topic, talking about economic inclusion, how do partnerships between private sector and multilateral development banks accelerate financial inclusion and make a difference in the kind of context that Salma is talking about?
Thank you. Morning, everyone. I know the weather changed slightly this morning. We just need to turn things up a little. And it's an interesting topic that we're having. In terms of the message, there's a word that says if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with a partner. So with MDB Reach and the private sector, the combination takes us further and more impactful. How do we measure that? MDB brings catalytic capital. In this audience, since Monday that we've been having this annual summit, there's been communication and conversations ongoing about donor funds and where to invest and where to get the maximum return. That's the conversation we've been having all week. Catalytic capital, policy alignment, as well as regional credibility to the partnership. And when we combine all that together with innovation, we're able to de-risk investments in underserved communities, which is where Africa comes in. Africa is projected to host 9 out of the 20 world fastest economies. And there was some survey done by Genesis, mandated by MasterCard, that projects digital payments in Africa come 2030 to be tracking at $1.5 trillion. That's a lot. And it is worth paying attention to. But how do we get this across the line? The private sector needs to come with inclusion, with impact and integrity. AI for Africa should not be brought to Africa, should be built for Africans, not necessarily by Africans, but with an African context. And when we do that, the impact is massive. MasterCard has seen into the future as a tech partner and trusted tech partner to Africa over many years. We believe in the future of Africa, and we've leveraged responsible AI. Annually, we process 143 billion transactions, looking through and looking for threats, detection of threats in real time. When we look at all of this, we realize the partnership that will impact Africa for the long run is MDB's private sector with giants, tech giants like MasterCard. And some of the solution we provided for Africa has been community pass. The conversation across my co-panelists has been in terms of impacting Africa, taking it to the last mile. So Community Pass is a platform that MasterCard established to be able to impact the last mile for communities that would have otherwise be forgotten. We talk about digital identities. With Community Pass, the last mile have digital identities. They can connect to the world. You don't need to leave Africa to transact globally. The farmers that needed to have data, as the word goes, in God we trust, every other partner to bring data. Data is power. Data is life. With Community Pass, we've enabled the farmers to have a voice, to have a face, to be known, to participate in the digital economy. Also, partnerships, collaboration is the new competition. Strategic collaboration was what we did in Nigeria with Lagos State's Economic Trust Fund, where 720,000 civil servants and youth corpers. Indeed, according to Dr. Mustafa, Africa has a thriving youth population, but over 90% of our transactions are still done in cash.
Well,
so there's no
Shade,
trace.
if I may just come back to what you were talking there when you mentioned the farmers, because that intersection of agriculture, which Salma was talking about, and digital marketplaces and inclusion, as you were talking about, actually represents a particularly promising arena for the application of AI. So I'd like us to look at yet another case study from Morocco this time, looking at what some of the challenges there were. So I think we've pretty much talked about what these challenges are. We've talked about how farmers are isolated from markets. Salma painted a very clear picture of the challenges in terms of digital inclusion with some of the rural areas. In this particular case, demand was hard to predict. Food waste was very high. And because we've touched a lot on the challenges, I think we'll just go straight, if that's okay, from the technical team, to looking at the outcomes from this case study in terms of the intervention that came into picture. A reduction of food waste from 40% to 6% is huge, and that's with a $7 million investment there, as well as many other impacts. I just wonder, Salma, looking at a case study like that, what other opportunities do you see for digital platforms to strengthen agricultural value chains in the context within which you work?
I want to talk about farmer loyalty, because that's what keeps me awake at night, right? Because we make a lot of investments in our supply chain, and there's one single indicator that actually summarizes all of the work we do. How do we get the farmer to sell his or her product to us by the end of the day, right? Because if we don't manage that, because we buy traceably, we basically failed. And that is measured by way of volumes delivered versus volumes forecast, right? And the farmer will never tell you he's sold elsewhere. He will always blame the weather. And there are many factors, obviously, that can impact the farmer's ability to deliver the expected volume, right? There is climate, there's the price, there's liquidity, there is how he's managed or she's managed the plantation, etc. So with what we've built in terms of the data, the curated data, the structured data we have internally through our digital systems, we are currently able to actually identify trends in farmer behavior. And that's really exciting, because it means that I want to be able to measure if actually we install a water pump in one of the 215 villages we work with, does that improve female loyalty? Does that improve the quality of the cashew we buy from? And with the current data systems we have, we are currently able to do that. And I find that really exciting. But I do want to kind of talk about a bit more about what Mustafa was talking about, which was radio, right? So when it comes to communicating with our farmers, we're still quite old-fashioned. We believe face-to-face communication is the best way and the only way in many ways, because of all the connective issues we have. So we have a team of 60 people, field agents, who actually follow the farmer throughout. And that's probably old-fashioned, and we've innovated recently by using SMS, right? And it's exciting to use SMS, because remember, the farmers have a Nokia phone. We're talking here about GSM access. And we're talking here about aging population. And that's a point I really want to strike home today, is that agriculture is not sexy for the youth, right? The youth prefer gold panning to actually staying in the farm, right? Farming is the last resort at the moment with our supply chain. So the farmers are aging, they have Nokia phones, and it's very difficult for us today to actually extend our rural sourcing management for them to use, because a smartphone is such a leap for them.
I think that is a really good point. And it brings us to this issue of, I think, thinking in homogeneous terms, which is not very useful. And I want to come to you with that, Dr. Mustafa, because it's also related to a question that we've got on our Slido, and I'll weave some of the questions from you in as we widen out our discussion. Dr. Mustafa, we sometimes talk about African AI as though the continent represents a unified context, but we've got more than 2,000 languages, there's 54 countries, there's vast regional difference. How do we ensure, and this is a question coming in from Dr. Joy Saleh, thank you for your question. You say, how do we ensure that data, broadband infrastructure in Africa keeps up with today's AI use cases and tomorrow's fast approaching quantum is the word that she uses. But just, I think what I want you to do here is, how do you answer a question like that when you're talking about such different regional contexts?
So the answer is, I don't think it's possible to bring one unified answer to such a diverse set of subpopulations. Now, she's perfectly right. We have more significant linguistic diversity within Africa than outside of Africa globally. Now, that being said, it is important to note that that linguistic diversity doesn't mean that there are not commonalities between the languages that we're talking about and the populations. And there is a lot to learn from each other. The most important thing is not to build one model or one AI to rule them all. The most important thing is to build a framework that is aligned with the different populations and that can be customized locally. And let me give you an example of why this is important. You showed the video of these models in Kyrgyz, and those models are localized. Basically, we have open source large language models, and when we talk about local AI models, what we're usually talking about is taking a large existing model and adapting it locally. So building AI that's relevant and aligned with local context should not just mean adapting an existing large language model to a local context. Because if that is what we do, to her point, it will be difficult to build for the populations that are in Sub-Saharan Africa because of the linguistic diversity. However, if we look at the problems locally and consider the specificities of the region at large, and also the commonalities, we can build something that is more customizable locally. And the example I wanted to give very quickly is that if you take a large language model and you adapt it to Kyrgyz, you are still using what's called the original tokenizer. Now, the tokenizer is what defines the unit of representation of the data, and that tokenizer is usually built on a larger amount of data, predominantly English. Irrespective of the level of adaptation, if you use a large tokenizer, built originally for the large language model, and you adapt the model to the local context, you are still going to generate sequences for which you will pay more than if you originally developed the tokenizer for the local context, meaning that you are paying a tax just because you don't speak English. However, importantly, if you build such tokenizer with multiple African languages, despite their differences, it would still be much more adapted to each of them individually than importing a tokenizer that was built predominantly for English. So despite this diversity, there is wealth in pooling our resources together and putting our efforts together and building together before specializing it locally, because we have more in common than we go when we use models that were completely developed outside. Okay. And that's what we're trying to do here at Kera as well. I will tell you more about it, I think, in a different question. Thank you.
Thank you. So it's really about setting up the frameworks for adaptability. Thank you for all your questions. There's some really good ones here that I'd like us to get into a little. There's one here about, this one says, EBRD programs encourage offering training to small businesses. What are key AI skills or use cases of tools that we should promote to micro and SMEs? So that's an interesting one about the tools. There's another one here about someone saying, we see a lot of providers talking up their ability to provide AI insights. Can someone give us an example of such AI insights useful to SMEs in Africa? Matthew, I wonder if that's something you could touch on, just because it's also related to a question I had about what sort of data frameworks are available and who's involved in that.
Well, it's a very interesting question, because there's been a lot of work done by the African Union recently to try and not only educate, but provide a basis or a foundation for territories to collaborate on these sort of initiatives in terms of data collection and understanding how to optimize their data sets. Because one of the things that we've seen recently from a European perspective is a drive from the EU, for example, to have more sovereign technology. And one of the things they're doing is they're setting up AI hubs and they're providing more data. And I think it comes back to some of the points that have been raised here already on this panel. For SMEs to be able to build optimal tools that are relevant to their territory, they need access to data that is valuable to them. And certainly, when it comes to agriculture, for example, having access to more weather data from satellites, for example, would be useful in predicting, when there's going to be a drought, when there's going to be other issues to contend with. And so it's a case of actually governments making available more data to SMEs so they can use perhaps even machine learning or deep learning models. It doesn't have to be the generative models to actually make significant strides forward.
Thank you. And if there is a question in the room, we do have a microphone, so I'll just say that if you do have a question, please raise your hand and we'll come to you in just a moment. But before we get to that, for Lashade, I just wanted you to touch quite briefly on the dynamic between private sector innovation and government-led digital policies, because there is sometimes tension and sometimes it's helpful. How do you navigate that, and how can those sometimes divergent impulses align so that there's a coherent digital strategy?
Thanks. Again, we come back to strategic collaboration that is built on trust. Private sector, MDBs, and other players should work with ecosystem players, especially the regulatory bodies.
So if I may ask, how have you worked with different regulatory bodies across the continent to build those cohesive frameworks?
Right. So it's across Africa. In MasterCard, we work with regulators to set up regulatory sandboxes to test those innovations and to make sure that it is relevant to African context. And I was going to touch on the SMEs. The farmers are also, and they qualify as SME in the context of SME. And a sterling example of how AI in context of Africa with real life information has transformed lives is Farmers Line Dali AI Advisor that was launched in Ghana, March 2024. Within 7 months, 110,000 farmers has benefited from WhatsApp bots and IVR generated advisors to those farmers. Farmers Line Dali AI has 27 languages, including Swahili. Yoruba is my native language in Nigeria. Farmers Line has been able to support many farmers, bridging the language gap.
So that's an app that's spanning multiple languages, producing these.
Which is in direct response
results
to Dr. Mustafa's comments around
that
making sure that works across multilingual sector, which is what that is. We can also explore that.
That's a brilliant example. Do we have a question from the room? Okay, I think the questions are preferred digitally, which is fine considering our topic. Someone asked, what's the potential for job creation in this space for Africa? Will technology not take away the real jobs that are required? That's an interesting one. Okay, Salma, I'm going to throw that to you. We've got about 3 minutes left, so you've got 1 minute.
I can talk about
tell us how that works.
Absolutely, I can talk about what we're doing right now, right? Because we are now trying to leverage AI as a business advantage, which is very exciting. So we are associating satellite, weather, and on-farm data to actually develop predictive models. So I've had to recruit people on my team now, right? We've recruited 2 data scientists who are actually African. We have a tech manager, and we have to actually beef up our field agents because the on-farm data is so much more important. And we're actually also investing in drones, right? To capture that data and to be able to use these drones, we have to train even more people. So for us, the reality is today, Africa's agri-future is actually happening today, and we have to build it to be fair, smart, and transparent. And the job creation is now.
That's wonderful, because you can possibly argue with data. It's very hard to argue with experience, isn't it? And that's exactly what you're seeing. We could go on and on, obviously, but this is all the time we have. I just want to thank you so much, our panelists, for really driving the point home that the question isn't about whether there will be a digital transformation in Africa. There will be one. It's just about whose hands will it be led by. And I think there's a clear call here to have, it doesn't matter who's doing it, but it needs to be authentic to the African context, and it needs to be relevant locally as well as practical globally. So I just want to say a big thank you to our panelists, Dr. Mustafa, Salma, Folashade, and Matthew. And thank you also to you for being a wonderfully attentive audience.
Thank you.